Hypatia, the famous female intellectual philosopher from the city of Alexandria in Roman Egypt, was an anomaly of her age, thriving during a time when so much of what she represented, was being systematically rejected by the changing world around her. She was a pagan woman in a Christian age dominated by religiously charged power politics rather than ethical concerns. Hypatia was accepted, however, by the enlightened of all faiths, believe it or not, for a while, whether pagan, Christian, or Jew, viewed by them as a wise and seasoned advisor. However, while others, those steeped in the growing superstition and bigotry of the age, cried out that she must be a vile occultist practicing magic to deceive the simple minds. Michael Deacon declares, quote, almost alone, virtually the last academic, she stood for intellectual values, for rigorous mathematics, ascetic Neoplatonism, the crucial role of the mind, and the voice of temperance and moderation in civic life, unquote. The violent public murder of Hypatia by those who failed to understand what she represented truly demonstrated that an age of ignorance had arrived. The classical world of Greece and Rome was no more, and the medieval world had begun. Today, I will introduce you to this deep and insightful woman who fought so hard to maintain a world of toleration against all odds, never losing sight of her sense of purpose. Hypatia was a true hero, one that needs to be recognized, but also the age she lived in serves as a warning to how a forest society can fall when knowledge and education are abandoned for power, politics, and superstition. You can see here how potentially relevant this topic is for us today. By all accounts, Hypatia, the famous female intellectual from Alexandria, was born around 350. We will talk about that and why I choose that date in a little bit. And she was murdered in 415 CE. She was, as I said, an anomaly of the age, thriving during this time when so much of what she represented was being systematically rejected by the changing world around her. So often it is stressed that Hypatia was important because she was a female philosopher. But in actuality, Hypatia was only one of so many great female thinkers before her, going back in time to the pre-Socratic philosophers and even prior to that. I must stress that despite what we've been taught and the conventional modern thinking within academia, female philosophers in antiquity were not only around, but they were commonplace. So I'm going to go through with you a list of some of the female philosophers that were around prior to Hypatia, just kind of an overview. And so I will start with the first image. So the first image, it's Themistoclea. She was a philosopher. She was a priestess of Delphi. She is said to be a teacher of Pythagoras. And then later on, next image, you also have Theano. She's from the 6th century. She is the wife of Pythagoras. But she was also, did you guys know that she was also a philosopher? Her specialty was in mathematics. She pioneered an idea that would later lead to a concept known as psychology. She led the Pythagorean school after Pythagoras. She wrote a a cosmology. She wrote a work on the theory of numbers. In fact, she talked about the fact that Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, as well as the moon, circled around a great fire, which of course you can see where that idea is leading to. And she is also the first one to publish the idea of the golden mean. That's a big deal. So, next one. Yeah, next picture, it's Damo. This is the daughter of Pythagoras. She preserved and edited writings of Pythagoras. So she's the one who continued the legacy of the Pythagoreans. Next image. Next image, this is Mia. We don't have any actual image of her, but Mia, she's also a daughter of Pythagoras. Um, Now, I got to tell you this. A lot of her writings uh, do survive. But it's interesting. What she did is she applied Pythagorean ideas to child rearing. She even has a whole section that, if you want to look it up, it's how to breastfeed the Pythagorean way. Everything well done and in balance. Again, why do we not know this? Keep on going. The next one, this is Eric Note from 500 BCE. She's a Pythagorean philosopher. She investigated also mysteries related to Dionysus and Demeter, and she wrote many works, including the sacred discourses and epigrams and works on Dionysus and Demeter. Some of these works do survive in fragments. The next one, it kind of skips out. It's on the wrong order, but that's okay. This is Abrotelia. I put it in the wrong orders now. Abrotelia from the 5th century CE. She's also a Pythagorean philosopher. Iamblichus, who is the famous Neoplatonist philosopher, calls her a great philosopher and one of 15 female philosophers that he personally lists as important. Next one. What about Hypatia, right? Hypatia lived between 470 to 400 BC. She's one of the teachers of Socrates. That's right. She's from Miletus, which is in Asia Minor. She had a relationship with Pericles. She was known as a great rhetorician, master of persuasion, and she's an advocate for gender equality. Next one. You guys are just like, whoa. How about Diotima of Mantinea, 5th century BC, one of the teachers of Plato? In fact, she is the one that talked about the philosophy of love, the idea of eros, and in fact, this idea of universal attraction. And so many of her ideas go directly into Platonism and emanation philosophy. What about the next one? Asclepiademia from the 5th century. Athenian philosopher. This is CE, wrong order, but Neoplatonic. Proclus actually studied under her. Next one. You also have Arete of Cyrene. She is a natural philosopher. She was actually the leader of the philosophical school at Cyrene, and she believed that discipline, knowledge, and virtue leads to pleasure as a natural philosopher. Next one, you have Asara of Luciania, a Pythagorean philosopher. She focused in on human nature, and parts of her works survive. She was also very much into the idea of the tripartite soul, which she believed was mind, spirit, and desire. Right. The next one. You also have Nicotia of Megara. She's a philosopher of the Megarian school. Okay. Next image. Are we learning a lot here already? You also have Plenties from the 4th century BCE, a Pythagorean philosopher. She actually writes out how a woman can become a philosopher, kind of a step-to-step guide. Next one. How about Axiothea of Philius, 4th century BC, Platonist philosopher? It's interesting because she dressed as a man, during the time she attended Plato's academy. Later on, she switched, but I think it's still very interesting. Next image. And of course, here's Lasthenia of Manarea, 4th century BC, a Platonist philosopher. How about the next one? Here's Timika of Sparta. She's from the 4th century BC. She's a Pythagorean philosopher. She was a very, she wanted to guard the mysteries, the Pythagorean mysteries. And there was a tyrant who was trying for her to give away the secrets. And she was known to bite off her own tongue rather than divulge the mysteries of Pythagoras. Next one. How about Hypatia of Alexandria, 350 to 280 BC, Cynic philosopher. Next one. I think we're learning quickly here. What about Leotim, 300 BC? She's an Epicurean philosopher. She actually wrote works against Aristotle. In fact, I got to tell you, Hypatia does like Aristotle to a certain degree, but she prefers Plato. But you will note when I go through this list, the majority of the female philosophers do not like Aristotle. They are Pythagoreans or they're Platonists, but apparently these stock features of absolute designation of certain ideas when it comes to gender norms that Aristotle likes to articulate because he likes categorizing everything. Many women did not like to be pinned down like a bug, isolated, and decided that they have to be a certain way. So Aristotle could be good, but in this case, and you'll see this is the trend if you hadn't noticed already. By the way, I want to mention that Leontim was actually used by Cicero and Pliny the Elder as a credible source. So I think we're learning things pretty quickly just by me saying that, right? So let's go on to the next one. How about Baptist of Lampsacus, 3rd century BC, Epicurean philosopher? We have discovered some of her letters in the ancient city of Herculaneum. Yes, isn't that great as a discovery? So why don't we go ahead and read these writings, right? Next image. This is Themistia of Lampsacus, 3rd century BC. She's an Epicurean philosopher. And in fact, she worked directly under Epicurus, and Epicurus praised her abilities, and many famous writers after that comment on the fact that Epicurus looked up to her on so many different levels. And I think that's interesting in and of itself. Next one, here's Melissa. She's a Pythagorean philosopher. Let's go to the next one. She's from 200 BCE. Next one is Ptolemaeus of Cyrene, 1st century BCE, Pythagorean philosopher. She endeavored ideas connected to musical theory, the roles of reason and sensory experience, what they play in the study of music and harmonics. And yes, parts of her works do survive. Next image. How about Maria Prophetessimia, 200 CE, also known as Mary the Jewish? She's the first recognized alchemist of the Western world. She created the bain marie, which is they call it the water bath or the double boiler, which heats materials gently. It can be used for alchemical purposes. It can also be used for good cooking and having everything seasoned pretty well. Again, another very important individual. Let's keep on going. This is Julia Dama. She's a Syrian philosopher, and she's the wife of the Emperor Septimius Severus. She is Arab in background. She created an entire literary school of writers, sophists, and Neoplatonists. In fact, she's the one who commissioned the famous work by Philostratus on Apollonius of Tyana, which is another talk that I did before. She's also, her salon gave birth to the second sophist movement. So very important individual. Next image. You have Catherine of Alexandria, a Christian philosopher who was martyred during the Diocletian persecutions. Next one is one of my favorites. This is Sosipater of Ephesus. Unfortunately, no image of her survives from the 4th century. She's a Neoplatonic philosopher and mystic, also an expert on the Chaldean oracles, and possibly a future topic at another time. Next image. Many people heard of the 3 Cappadocians. Actually, there are 4 Cappadocians. Of course, Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus, who are the ones who really are the establishment of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Did you know that? In fact, to this day, you will typically find at least 2, if not all 3, of these famous Cappadocians in every Orthodox church that you go into. But interestingly enough, Macrina, the younger, who is related to Basil and Gregory, that's her sister. She contributed a whole bunch of works and theological ideas and so forth. And the interesting thing is, where do we get this information from? Her brother, and of course herself too. So interesting source. And of course, next, of course, we have Hypatia. And then the last one I'll talk about her in more detail, and that's Hypatia of Alexandria from the 5th century. So you could see there is quite a bit. Now, let's look at me for a few seconds. But I want to say a few things. I think many of you are blown away, and many of you are just realizing that classicists and ancient historians have not done their job correctly. I am sorry. If you are one of these individuals, I love you a lot, but please balance it out. Can you imagine if they taught about these female philosophers, ancient philosophers, from going on to whenever you bring up the regular philosophy, whether it be in junior high or high school or college, can you imagine how that would change our perception, our perspective? And so it also changes our perspective of the ancient world. But the problem is that what happened? How come we don't hear about them? Is it their fault? Now, I'm not going to claim, and it's that there was no patriarchy in this era. Patriarchy is a dominant form during this period of time. The fact that there's so many that survived and their writings survived, and that we know about them in the first place, despite that fact, is a testimony of the resilience of these great thinkers, these wonderful intellects that have given so much. We owe it to them to remember their legacy. I just want to say that. So, as obvious, Hypatia's is, of course, the one that is what we're going to be focusing on today. And the fact is that after Hypatia and Theseus as well, seems to be a gap. There's a few here and there, but there's a gap of female philosophers in the West. I mean, careful, in the West, not the East, in the West, all the way until the 12th century, and then all of a sudden we get theologians and philosophers again. But that's a nice, unfortunately, or bad gap. Okay, so the question moves to what forces were at work to make Hypatia one of the last great female thinkers of antiquity, and what she represents as a figure in transition. What political, religious, and social forces during the 4th to 5th centuries acted to diminish the female voice within the intellectual circles, or at least to suppress them? And was this influence related in any way to the rise of Christianity as a major political influence within the Roman Empire? It must be said that Hypatia was already born during a time when Christianity was gaining ascendancy in the Roman Empire. 50 years before Hypatia's birth, at the beginning of the 4th century, the empire was dominated by the pagan Roman Emperor Diocletian. Next image, who ordered all to participate in the imperial cult, where he was worshipped as both Lord and God. Christians failed to comply, And for that reason, they were hunted out, captured, and systematically tortured and then put to death. The streets of Alexandria ran with Christian blood. So severe were the persecutions of Diocletian in Alexandria and to that particular Christian community that they still date today their calendar from the time of that persecution. But eventually, Diocletian and his co-emperor Maximian ended the persecutions. Next image. Now, the Roman Empire was split into what was called the Tetrarchy, with the main divisions set between the Greek East under Diocletian and the Latin West under the Maximian. But they each had assistants known as Caesars to assist them. Galerius, working under Diocletian, which is on the right-hand side of the map there, and Constantius working under Maximian, under the left-hand side. But unlike the other three holding direct jurisdictional power over the empire, Constantius refused to participate in the Christian persecutions in the quarter of the Roman Empire under his administration, in what is currently Germany, Holland, Belgium, France, and England, having Christian sympathies because he himself was a monotheist, worshiping Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. When he died, his son, Constantius' son, Constantine, also a worshiper of Sol Invictus, followed after his father's footsteps and was declared Roman emperor by his troops in York. Next image. In 312, just before he was going to go into battle at the Milvian Bridge near Rome against another proclaimed emperor of the West, a certain Maxentius by name, he supposedly had a vision where he saw the sign of the cross upon the sun and saw the words, "In this sign conquer." Establishing this sign for his troop standards, Constantine went on into battle and was victorious, with Maxentius thrown into the Tiber River. From then on, Constantine, still not officially a Christian convert, greatly respected the Christian God. Next image. The next year, sorry, that's me, in Rome, with the monolithic remnants of a statue of Constantine. The next year, in 313 CE, Constantine and his co-emperor at that time, by the name of Licinius, issued the Edict of Milan that proclaimed the toleration of all religions in the empire, inclusive of Christianity and Judaism, also pagan religions. That's right. Now, you're going, why is this important? What does it have to do with Hypatia? You'll understand because, remember, we're talking about the age that Hypatia grew up in. We got to establish the scene because we got to understand what she does within this established context. Okay, I'm being a historian on you. I'm sorry. Okay, so what happens is that, but immediately the church became divided over the issue of whether they should let those who denied their faith during the persecutions back into the church or not. And when the Bishop of Rome could not resolve the issue, that's the Pope, they appealed to Constantine to arbitrate. Forced into an unusual position, Constantine called for a church meeting to decide this issue, which became the Council of Arles, which is in the south of France today, in 314. With most of the important bishops present, Constantine legislated that all those supposed fallen Christians should be brought back into the fold. What happens here is a problem. You see, those bishops should not have shown up at the Council of Arles, because by doing so, they placed the emperor into a position of deciding the fate for the church. Had they left it to the Bishop of Rome, you wouldn't have this problem. But now that you did this, what happens is it creates a precedent of church and state issues coming together. Are you guys following? That's why this is important and why this connects to Hypatia later on. Is this helpful, right? This is the germ, so to speak, that starts it all, you know. But at this time, all religions are tolerated. The middle, which is interesting. The Edict of Milan is tolerant to whatever God there is in heaven. It doesn't. It's not. Constantine does not. I'll say this again. Constantine never makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. He never does it. That is a pseudo event. And if you are interested in hearing more about this in detail from that actual time, from sources from that time, I do have a talk earlier that's on my YouTube channel on Constantine, and I go into extreme detail. It doesn't mean that Christians were not favored at times, but not the official religion. Who does that, by the way, is Theodosius the First. Theodosius the First in the years 391 and 392, way after 313 and 314, right? 391, 392, and Theodosius is the one that does it, and that is what directly starts to affect Hypatia in Alexandria. So we'll keep on going, but I hope that kind of helps that a little bit. So they shouldn't have showed up, but they did. But now a precedent was created, a dangerous one, whereby whenever the church had problems resolving their theological difficulties, they felt free to appeal to the Roman emperors for help. Such a situation came up again, with the problem actually starting in Alexandria in connection with a certain priest by the name of Arius, who professed that since Christ was begotten, born of the Father, there was a time when he was not, and that there was a time when he was not. This means the Son was not. That means if he didn't exist at a certain time, that means he is limited. And because he's born, right? And if he is limited, then he cannot be fully God. And therefore, he was less than the Father, and perhaps even a creature of the Creator. Once again, the Christian world was divided, and while Constantine tried he really tried hard to put the genie back into the bottle, it was too late. And so you have another controversy ripping across the Roman world. Once again, the Christian world was divided, and while Constantine tried to put a gag rule of don't ask, don't tell, violence erupted throughout the Christian communities. And so Constantine then called the Council of Nicaea in 325, which met at his palace along the lake, where they deemed Arianism as heretical, because it's proposed by Arius. That's why it's called Arianism, having nothing to do with the Aryan race, that's spelled differently too. Arianism heretical, and put together the Nicene Creed. Well, this peace lasted only 3 years, for soon Arius and his supporter, Eusebius and Nicomedia, were freed from exile, with Constantine's sympathies beginning to go over to the Arian perspective. When Constantine died in 357, the Roman Empire was divided between his 3 sons, Constantius, named after his grandfather, Constans, and Constantine II. Hey, let's just look at me for a little bit. What do you think about that, right? It's like what is Constantine? It's like a basketball player. I mean, Constantine. I'll name my kids Constantius, Constance, and Constantine II. Pretty creative stuff going on there, but whatever, right? So what happens is soon Constantine II died, leaving Constantius in charge of the Greek East and Constans in charge of the Latin West. Constans proclaimed his loyalty to be on the side of the Nicene cause, while Constantius became a vigorous Arian. This division almost brought the 2 brothers to war, but when Constans died in 350 CE, well, with Constantius inheriting the entire empire, things, of course, started to change, right? Constantius now had everything. And he attacked the Nicene, anybody who followed the Nicene Creed, with quite a bit of vigor. 350. What's happening in 350? He especially, of course, attacked the city of Alexandria. Wait, isn't Hypatia born in 350? Uh-huh. So here we go. And so in 350, Constantius declared the Council of Nicaea as null and void, and the Nicene Creed as heretical, and ordered all to officially adopt Arian Christianity as the only official form of Christianity. Immediately, Constantius began systematically persecuting Nicene Christians. Here, Hypatia enters into our story. For many scholars believe she was born around 350 CE, directly at the start of this persecution, which was focused on the city of Alexandria. So much going on there. Oh, yeah. Arius of Alexandria is this. Okay, I got it. Yeah, yeah. So you could see not a good time to be born. Lots of violence going on. Now, many scholars in the past have dated Hypatia's birth to 370 CE, but this does not appear to be supported by the evidence on hand. Here we go. The various titles that Snesius, we'll hear more about Snesius soon, her devoted student, bestows upon Hypatia are not those one would place upon a 20-year-old woman and someone matching his age in the 390s when he was studying with her, had she born in the 370s. His distinctions are reserved for someone who is definitely more mature. And you're going, maybe he's just, no. Once again, let's go into something here. Yes, we live more in a casual society. Well, some of us do. but the Romans were more formal. And so when it came to Latin as well as Greek designations, you would reserve certain kinds of titles for people who are older. You just would do that. You wouldn't automatically refer to somebody younger using a title that's meant for somebody who's more elderly. Remember, elderly doesn't mean in your 80s or 90s because people are living shorter lives, unfortunately. So is this helpful? But there's more. I got more, but this is the first step. His distinctions are reserved, of course, someone definitely more older. While the Suda, which is a source, another source, appears to show the father's prime, that is Hypatia's prime, during the reign of Theodosius, 379 to 395, this appears to contradict the information that Theon, that's the father's name, was already predicting the eclipse of the sun and moon in the year 364. As we know from Theon's own writings. Hey, you got to read Theon's writings, right? And was already well into his career at that point, making his prime not the time of Theodosius, but the time of the Emperor Gratian, which is 367 to 383, rather than under Theodosius. In fact, from the evidence of Theon's works, the most likely time of his birth, this is Theon, is between 330 to 335. The references to Arcadius being emperor at a certain point in Hypatia's career, which one would assume would be from the time of his father's death in 395, and then continuing into 408, has to take into account that Arcadius was actually declared an Augustus alongside his father between, in the year 383 CE. And so the evidence leads up to determine Hypatia's birth between 350 and 355, making her a woman in her 60s when she was murdered in 415. How are we doing? I know that we see depictions of her at the very end as being young, but she was older at that time. How you guys doing? It's kind of fun, right? It's like, oh, okay. And of course I have to go through and I have to fight popular culture on this. I have to fight also some historians who are more into the popular culture. But sorry, but the evidence makes her older. So that means that when you had the Hypatia movie, you could still cast this, cast Hypatia as younger, but have her progressively get older as it goes along. Okay, now, as a little girl, Hypatia would have observed the horrendous persecutions of Constantius against the Nicene Christians that continued unto his death in 361. And so that means that this is going on. We're around 350 to 355. Well, these persecutions in Alexandria and everywhere else, but especially Alexandria, went to 361. That's a long time. With soldiers going from house to house in the middle of the night, dragging away Christians who profess the Nicene Creed as Orthodox. In the Alexandria of Hypatia's youth, Nicene Christians were beaten to unrecognized forms by thorn palm branches and then flung out into the desert. Their bodies left to rot where they fell and refused burials. The women were stripped, threatened with flames, and brutally whipped. They attacked the orphanages and the places for widows. They were seized in the cemeteries. There appeared to be no place to escape. By the way, all this is from primary sources, including Socrates Scholasticus, if you want me to give you a name. Hypatia would have noted that even Christians did not appear to get along if they even had the slightest of theological differences, let alone Christians in relation to pagans, possibly creating her spirit of toleration for all, whatever their beliefs in relation. So for her school was later composed of pagans and every variety of Christianity, where at least while under her teaching, she made it very clear, they were to constitute what she called them her family. Set aside from the rest of the world, which was constantly at odds with one another. Growing up in that environment, she wanted to create a place of solace and peace between all different beliefs. Very ecumenical. But Constantius eventually died. I guess we should look at Constantius. So here, next image. There's Constantius, big meanie head. That's an academic term you may not understand. Big meanie head. Okay, anyway, going on. Sorry, I gotta have some fun here. But he died, and with it, so did the persecutions. Hypatia, in her preteens, would observe the next image. Julian, 361 to 363, repealing the Edict of Constantius and ending the persecutions of Nicene Christians. On February 4th, 362, Julian issued his official edict of religious toleration. Julian was neither of the Nicene party nor an Arian Christian, but a pagan, wishing to reinstate paganism, specifically a Hellenistic form of polytheism, as the official belief of the Roman Empire. As I said before, pagans were tolerated for the most part by the emperors Constantine, Constans, and Constantius, but often found themselves disenfranchised in authoritative positions as Christian patronage was on the rise by the middle of the 4th century CE. Julian attempted to reverse this situation, but then he began to become intolerant himself towards Christians. First of all, he promulgated an edict dictating that he should personally approve every public teacher in the public school system supported by state money. And since the epic known as the Iliad was considered central to education at that time, especially in literature, but was considered divinely inspired by pagans, Julian deemed that Christians could not then effectively teach it, and so refused permission to teach publicly with imperial approval. He declared, quote, "If they want to learn literature, they have Luke and Mark. Let them go back to their churches and expound upon them," unquote. As for those pagan temples that were turned into churches, Julian converted them back and kicked out their congregations. Most certainly, Hypatia would have observed that so many of her own faith were no better than the Christians. So now she's observing paganism now being intolerant of Christians. It's, again, Diocletian now this. By the way, just a little bit of trivia. A lot of did you guys know a little bit that Constantine the Great, before the dad of Constantius, Constantine, did you know that he only destroyed only five pagan temples? That was it. And the reason why he did that was, well, one was the Temple of Aphrodite at the site of Jerusalem, because it was the site where Jesus is believed to be crucified, and another one was at the Oaks of Mamre, where there's a pagan temple which is connected to Abraham. So he did that, one for the Jews, the Oaks of Mamre for Jews, because as Pontifex Maximus, the head of the Roman religion, which comes about with the Edict of Milan, he can decide, head of religion, he can decide who has what. So he did that for Jews. He did the Jerusalem for Christians, and then he closed three others. And that's because one was politically affiliated with Diocletian, he didn't like Diocletian, and they were wanting to overthrow him as the emperor. So, and he closed down the other two temples because they were doing child prostitution. So, there you have it. But the others were all open. But under Constantius, now the pressure comes, and many of these churches are being closed down. And then by popular appeal, and also people are converting over, but Julian opens them up again. Well, of course, what happens now that, where am I at? Okay. Julian's pagan reforms were short-lived, with Christianity reinstated with the next emperor, Jovian. But now Jovian reacted back against Julian's vigorous pagan reforms with his own vigorous Christian ones, having the library of Antioch burned down in 363 and making edicts against pagans to match those of Julian did towards Christians. It's kind of like tit for tat. Fortunately, Jovian did not live long for his reforms to really stick, dying within only 1 year. When Valentinian became ruler, he split the empire in half, personally taking the Latin West while giving his brother Valens the Greek East to rule. Still, I guess we'll look at me for a little bit. Still, during this time, with a few notable exceptions, pagans remained tolerated and even thrived. The head of the Library of Constantinople, for example, was the famous Themistius. He lived from 317 to 390. He was a pagan in Constantinople, which is the eastern capital, who remained a devoted polytheist until the end of his days and never had to apologize for it, being respected by all the emperors during his lifetime, from Constantine on. As director of the Library of Constantinople, Themistius commanded a legion of librarians below him, as well as copyists. Because of his interests, Themistius made it a priority to copy Homer, any classical Greek, as well as Hellenistic poets, and others beside that. By a little bit of trivia, a lot of people talk about he made lots of copies from the Library of Alexandria, and it became the Library of Constantinople. I thought the Library of Alexandria, it burned, under Julius Caesar. Well, yeah, I do a talk on Library of Alexandria, looking at the primary sources. What happened, actually, they did burn books. But guess what? Constantine, the Library of Alexandria, there's two of them. There's one that's located in the palace, and the other one was located in the Serapeum, which is the daughter library, which will be important later on in our conversations. There's two libraries of Alexandria. And what happens is that, well, guess what? Julius Caesar does not burn down the palace, nor the Serapeum. He burns a whole bunch of books, because Alexandria was a book center. He burns a whole bunch of the books that were along the harbor area, and then they were being shipped off. They were being shipped off because it was a book distributor, because of the papyrus was very important. But when people see the word books, they go, oh, even gets to the point where 100 years later, they go, oh, maybe he did burn it down. No, contemporaneous sources say no. In fact, Julius Caesar, after the battle, he spent the night in the palace, which was supposedly, burned. No, didn't happen. Uh, and uh, and so I think that's interesting. In fact, I have the librarians and the names of them going on, continuing on all the way into the fourth and early fifth century. We have the names. They continued on. But what happens is that during the time of Aurelian, during the 370s, you're going to have a destruction. Actually, under Caracalla, you're going to have destruction of the palace library, and then of course they'll always have a backup. And then during the time of Aurelian, you can destruction of the Serapeum, but then they'll rebuild it and so forth. And so, but the problem is that at the end of the Library of Alexandria, it turns out that people just lost interest, and the papyri just started falling apart. But Themistius, who we're talking about, is making all these copies, and that, as opposed to papyrus, which breaks apart after a certain amount of time, parchment stays for longer. And so the Library of Alexandria, much of the content ends up in the Library of Constantinople and lasts until the mid 400s. There's a fire of that library in Constantinople, but guess what? They already had backup, and within the year they replaced all the copies. And then later on, that goes into the library sorry, it goes further than the Academy of Athens, and then it goes into the Library of Nisibis, and then it goes further to the east into the Golden House. Just a little bit of fun trivia there. So Themistius is very much part of preserving the ancient paganism in the middle of this Christian age, which shows you it's not as Christian as you think it was, which is interesting in and of itself. He thrived, and so it shows you something. By the time of her teens, roughly during the time of Jovian and Valens, Hypatia had already abandoned. Let's go to the next image. Oh, wait, there's Themistius. I'm sorry, there's a nice little image there. Thank you. Next image. Great, glad I had that. There's Themistius. There's a great image of him there, who preserves so much for us. And of course, some of the writings at hand. Thank you. Good. Okay, so still, by the time of her teens, roughly during the reigns of Jovian, as I mentioned, Hypatia had already abandoned the thought of marriage and a family, and was set upon pursuing philosophy as her life vocation. Following the footsteps of her famous father, Theon of Alexandria, who is directly associated with the Museum of Alexandria, according to the 10th century Suda, which is basically a Byzantine encyclopedia, Theon was specifically called, quote, the man from the museum. Some say Theon was the last important member of that establishment, but others add that Hypatia too was a member, and so together represented the twilight of this once great educational institution. And so that continued all the way to 415. The museum continued to 415 with, of course, her death. Theon edited Euclid's Elements, creating the official version that would not be replaced until the 19th century. And so as you can see here, one of his pivotal works does indeed survive. Once again, this is Euclid's Elements. What he basically accomplished was to further explain through additional examples, subjects and applications that were not fully explored for a basic student to effectively understand Euclid's intentions. And I think that's important. Theon wrote many commentaries, including one on Euclid's Data and Optics and on Ptolemy's Almagest, both of which survive. Of particular importance, Theon's treatise on the astrolabe. Let's go to this image. Theon's treatise on the astrolabe was heavily cited by Philoponus in the 6th century, carrying on his knowledge then to Byzantine scholarship, which would eventually travel to the Latin West. But more than that, Theon's work was also cited by the 7th century Syrian scholar Severus Sikbok, and his writing would in turn influence the Muslim world of scholarship concerning this device, the astrolabe. The astrolabe, the word deriving from the Greek astrolobos, means star taker. It is very sophisticated, It's an inclinometer. It is an instrument intended to measure slopes and inclines, which was used not only by astronomers and astrologers, but it also was used by navigators. The specific function was to locate the position of the sun, the moon, planets, and stars, and then from these calculations determine the local time in relation to the latitude at any given place, but was also used to predict where these celestial objects would move next. Astrolabes were used for celestial observation, navigation, surveying, triangulation of locations, and many other functions. Often they were used to cast horoscopes as well. So this is a very important device. And Hypatia's father, Theon, was instrumental in the course, obviously, the legacy of this particular device. Next image. Theon carried on the occult knowledge of the Library of Alexandria, especially in his now lost works called On Signs and Observations of Birds and the Sounds of Crows. Yeah. I would like to have that work. Just, how the sounds of crows can determine various things. All right. Especially how intelligent crows are, right? Also, his work on the rising of the dog star. Theon also wrote works on the inundation of the Nile. Many scholars attribute two works included, next image, two works included in the Corpus Hermeticum to Theon. The Peri Hermonides and another one dedicated to Ptolemy, both of them under the name of Theon. So he's connected directly to Hermetic writings. And of course, he was in the Peri Hermonides, the seven spheres known as Jove, Mars, Venus, the Moon, Saturn, the Sun, and Mercury controlled destiny, Moria, along with the stars, determining through their power and intelligence who we are in personal disposition and in our fate. All of these powers are subsumed under the Aeon, Lord of the unchangeable laws of the universe. The other work is in praise of the genius of Ptolemy, whose intellect was able to penetrate the mysteries of the heavens, his mind being freed of the dismal muddiness of our material selves. The duality of heaven versus nature, spirit or ether versus matter, is readily apparent. Also, Theon's language is often close to that was used in the Orphic Mysteries. Remember, this is Hypatia's dad. And you're going to see who becomes his assistant pretty soon. Of course, she's influencing these works too. We'll go into that in a little bit. In his work, Theon had many assistants to help him. Let's take a look at me for a little bit, including one close associate known as Pappus, whom he mentions and whose commentaries on the Alchemist he frequently used for reference. Most agree that Pappus was actually older than him. Other assistants include Ilalaeus, Origenius, and Epiphanius, the latter of whom calls who he calls Technon, which means child, who may have be his younger brother, but of course the designation could simply be an endearment for his youth. Yet, gradually, Theon found that his best assistant happened to be his own daughter, Hypatia, who is not only as resourceful as the others, but bright-eyed and brilliant, excelling them all in her knowledge of mathematics, even as most agree Theon himself. That's right. Damascius declared that Hypatia was, quote, this is Damascius, a primary source, declared that Hypatia was, quote, by nature, more refined and talented than her father, unquote. Increasingly, Hypatia became his partner in everything he produced, and she felt at liberty to improve upon his professional work too. There is every indication that Theon was proud of his daughter, not letting his ego get in the way, and as also evident, encouraged her to go even further than he did, taking on mathematical challenges he himself dared not to fully confront. For example, the works Diaphantus, considered Diaphantus is he's considered the most difficult Greek mathematician to arrive from antiquity. He wouldn't do it. She will. Both Theon of Alexandria and his daughter Hypatia realized the world was changing fast in the 4th century, especially for those who did not profess Christianity. The dramatic change in the treatment of pagans happened with the Emperor Theodosius. Let's go to a few images here. I like this image of, even though it's generated, of the two together, working close together. And she will slowly take up and continue his work, improve upon it, and then do her own material. Next image. Okay, here we go. This is Theodosius the first. Take a long drink on this one. All right, this is where the problem begins. Okay, so the change began with Theodosius I, who reigned from 379 to 395 CE, and of course, not Constantine earlier, as erroneously told and popularized by such books as the Da Vinci Code, popular culture. You can't trust it. And this change came about on June 16th, 391 CE. Do you want an exact date? I just gave it to you. June 16th, 361 CE. The Emperor Theodosius I decreed that public pagan worship in any form was now forbidden, with sacrifices to cease immediately as of that date, according to the Codex Theodosianus. According to Socrates Scholasticus, for Theophilus, who was the Bishop of Alexandria, this edict was not harsh enough, but he decided to go a step further, next image, and ordered all the temples. This right here is an image of Emperor Theodosius. Theophilus, Bishop of Alexandria. There's the full image shows him standing on a ruined pillar of the Serapeum. But there you have it. So this Bishop of Alexandria, he thought that Theodosius didn't go far enough. And so he ordered all the temples in the city to be destroyed. Next image. Naturally, many of the Alexandrians rioted. As a person, Theophilus of Alexandria, the patriarch of the city from 385 to 412 CE, was especially cruel to anyone who believed differently from himself. For example, once supporting the ideas of the 3rd century CE Christian philosopher Origen, he suddenly changed his mind in 399, just changed his mind, because many of the monks who embraced his views did not support him politically, and he ordered the slaughter of 10,000 of them. Told you he was not a nice guy. Theophilus was also known for his constant feuds with Constantinople, and managed to get the famous patriarch known as John Chrysostom deposed from his office at the Synod of the Oak in 403 CE. John being one of the most important fathers of the Eastern Orthodox Church today. So you can only imagine how he treated pagans, since he really did not treat anyone fairly as a rule. Next image. Now, the city of Alexandria was famous for its temple of Serapis, which was also contained part of the Library of Alexandria at the time. I said part, not all, as I mentioned. For the museum, located elsewhere, contained the other half. While the museum was destroyed around 273 during the Emperor Aurelian's war against Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, when the palace area was burned, we know from primary sources that it was rebuilt and located elsewhere in Alexandria, and that both Hypatia and her father were associated with this establishment. Next image. Writing in the 4th century, a person by the name of Antonius records as follows of the Temple of Serapis. To one entering the Acropolis itself, One area is divided into 4 equal sides. The plan of the arrangement is like that of a hollow rectangle with an open court surrounded by a colonnade in the center, and other colonnades succeed this open court. These are distinguished by matched columns, and as for their size, is that beyond which it is impossible to find a greater one. Each colonnade comes to an end against another traverse colonnade, and a double column is the division in reference to each colonnade, since it marks on the one hand the ending of one, and on the other hand the beginning of another. Where the colonnade enclosures were built, some having become repository for the books available to the diligent for study, thus spurring on an entire city to a mastery of learning. Others were established long ago to honor the gods. For colonnades, there is a roof adorned with gold, and the capital of columns are worked in bronze overlaid with gold. Nor is there only one adornment of the open court, for another is different. It has the battles of Perseus, and one of the columns rising from all the others in height occupies the center position, thereby attracting attention to the place. Anyone going along does not yet know where he is proceeding, unless he uses the columns of Diocletian as a sign of the ways. And being visible all around, it so makes the Acropolis on land and on sea. Indeed, the beauty is beyond the power of words, and if anything has been neglected, it happens to be a result of awe. Next image. Many still believe the statue of Serapis in the Temple of Serapis was sacred. Rufinus, another primary source, states, however, a belief had been spread amongst the Gentiles themselves that if a human hand was laid violently on the statue, the earth would immediately open up, dissolving into chaos, and suddenly the heavens would burst into the abyss. This story gave the people a senseless pause, when, behold, one of the soldiers, better protected by his faith than by his weapons, seized a double-edged axe, stood up, and with all his strength struck the jaw of the old man, which they referred to Serapis. A shout was raised by both groups of all his strength, but neither the sky fell, nor did the earth sink. Repeating his action several times, he cut off the worm-eaten genius of wood, blackened by smoke, once it was cast down and thrown into the fire, and it burned as easily as dry wood, after which the head was taken, having been torn away at the neck with the modius broken. Then the feet and the other limbs were cut up into pieces by blows of the axe, quartered and dragged off with the aid of ropes. Then in each locale, member by member, the decrepit old man was burned under the eyes of his adoring Alexandria. Finally, the trunk, which still remained, was burned in the amphitheater. Such was the end of the vain superstition and the ancient error of Serapis, say this Christian source. Now, I want to say another source actually mentions the same kind of thing a little later on, where the guy hits the axe into the statue, and it was full of rats, and the rats ran after the guy. It's like, okay, so there you have it. Next image. So what will happen is the fury of the mob. The temple of Serapis was then demolished. Theodoret stating, there's another primary, so Theodoret stating that Theophilus, this is the bishop of Antioch, focused upon, quote, razing the idol temples to the ground, unquote. Eunapius, another source, who's a sophist, wrote in 414 CE that, quote, the cult of the temples of Alexandria and the shrine of Serapis was scattered to the winds, and not only the ceremonies of the cult, but the buildings as well, unquote. Next image. The only exception were the foundations of the great temple, for he notes that, quote, only the floor of the temple of Serapis that did not take, simply because of the weight of the stones, which are not easy to remove from their place. And this is it. And apparently still today, there's still some left. Next image. So they've been excavated a little bit there, as you can see. Well, The persecutions continued, obviously. And I want to go to the next image. So this is, of course, not just Alexandria. This was all throughout Egypt. This is a Christian cross that is cut into the hieroglyphs at Philae in Upper Egypt. Next image. You could see here, this is an image of Diana or Artemis. And you could see that, of course, the nose is cut and a cross is chiseled into the head. This we find this all over the Roman Empire. They believed that the statues still had the power of the gods and goddesses within them. And so what they did is they would chisel the eyes. You can see the eyes chiseled here, cut off the nose, and then place a cross. And supposedly this ended the power of whatever demon they believed to inhabit these statues. Next image. This is interesting. This is an ancient priestess of Ceres. You can see by the note here. Still, this is as late as 400 CE, and it was defaced and thrown into a well. But you can see it was a beautiful piece. So that means even after 391 to 392, paganism survived in certain places, but soon after, you have, of course, destruction. Next image. So what will happen is, you can't change everybody's life, in just a few days. And so what will happen is they're thinking that all this ancient knowledge is going to be destroyed, and they did destroy quite a bit of it. Many of it does survive, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I also want to mention the fact that we have here that what will happen is Christianity, and you'll see this with the Hypatia and the students. Christianity, forms of Christianity, will embrace Greco-Roman beliefs and perspectives, and they will continue. Of course, obviously, the various heroes will become known as saints, for example. But also, you're going to have many of the different kinds of rituals transferred directly over into Catholicism. In many ways, the trappings of the ancient Capitoline religion of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, right down to the vestments of the Pope today, come right directly from this established imperium from that time. So it's all there, right? So people don't change. In fact, you'll see under Hypatia, you'll have an amalgamation of different forms of Christianity that does embrace aspects of pagan beliefs, or at least synchronizing these beliefs together. Next image. So at this point, at this time, paganism, of course, was officially no longer tolerated in any form. Now it gets interesting. Yet for some reason, Hypatia and her father continued in their popularity and were preserved from any personal attacks. Yeah, that's right. It was just this time during the reign of Theodosius I, 379 to 395, and his son Arcadius, emperor of the Greek East, 395 to 408, the Hypatia of Alexandria actually rose to the apex of her professional career, becoming directly connected with the famous Museum of Alexandria and a director of the Platonist School of Alexandria. So although Christianity had been proclaimed as the official religion of the Roman Empire, Hypatia's philosophical career as both a woman and a Hellene, that's what they called pagans at the time, they called them Hellenes, not only continued, but thrived, becoming one of the most important figures in Alexandria, sought out by polytheists and monotheists alike. What in the world is going on? See, now you're confused. You're like, well, I was told, well, that's why we're here. We're here to study this phenomenon. Like, wait, what's going on here? You have this devastating persecution. From east to west, you have, temples destroyed, chiseling down these statues and various persecutions. And then you have Hypatia, very much a public figure, standing out unscathed and adored, yes, adored by pagans and Christians, or Hellenes and Christians alike. At the Platonic School and the Museum of Alexandria, Hypatia taught many subjects. Next image. We know what she taught. Do you guys want to know what classes she taught? Sure, we know that. She taught a course on mathematics. She taught a course on astronomy. She taught a course on literature. And she taught a course on philosophy. Hey, don't worry. I'm going to give her book list later on. What? That survived too? That survived too. Again, you want to take notes on this, right? We know the Museum of Alexandria still existed even after the destruction of the Temple of Serapis, where what was called the daughter library was located. You want some evidence? Sure, I'll give you more evidence. For example, Synesius, spelled Synesius, Hypatia's closest student, specifically mentions how he saw images of both the philosopher Socrates and Herodotus in the Museum of Alexandria, again proving that this established continued on, making this note in the 5th century, early 5th century CE, in his work called In Praise of Baldness. Yes, and that works. That work survives. Yeah. Hypatia taught a course specifically called Divine Geometry. So can you imagine signing up for that one, right? And many courses related to astronomy, for she considered this topic to be one of the most important of all in relation to her philosophical teachings. Next image. According to the Suda, Hypatia was, this is a quote from, exceedingly beautiful and fair of form, in speech, articulate and logical, in her actions, prudent and public spirited, and the rest of the city gave her suitable welcome and accorded her special respect, unquote. We know from Synesius, her student, the Hypatia also had a very sweet sounding voice in tone. So we're really getting some great detail here. What do you guys think? Huh? Next image, as from Damascus in his life of Isidore, we know that in her dress, Hypatia wore the clothes of a philosopher who states, quote, donning the philosopher's cloak, tribon, and making her way through the midst of the city, she explained publicly, exegitio Demacia, the writings of Plato or Aristotle or any other philosopher, unquote. Yet while she was public about much of her information, she was also very private with other materials, only teaching certain of these, quote, philosophical mysteries, unquote, to an inner circle, for it was not right, it is said by, in the life of Isidore, not right, quote, for the unclean to handle that which was impure, unquote. Actually, that's Synesius, Epistle 137. As for Hypatia's personal life, going to the next image. As for Hypatia's personal life, according to the Suda, Hypatia, quote, remained a virgin, unquote, scaring away a potential love interest by handing him her menstrual rags, declaring that there was, quote, nothing beautiful, unquote, about the physical body and the lusts of the flesh. If you've seen the movie Hypatia, they did actually mention this moment. This account comes directly from Damascus, wherein the man happened to be one of her students who happened to fall in love with her. Hypatia felt she had to do her best to dissuade him as much as possible from pursuing her, but by revealing to him that while her spirit may be divinely influenced, her flesh was as human as anyone else and subject to the corruption and flaws of nature and its material impurities. As she handed him his menstrual rag in this story, she declared, quote, "This is really what you love, my young man, but you do not love beauty for its own sake," says Damascus in the fragment 102. Hypatia is referring here to what is called in Greek the idea of eros love. Knowing the student found her to be beautiful in a physical way and so lusted after her, we know that Hypatia's views of the physical body were the same as Plotinus, the founder of Neoplatonism, which you want to do Dominius, when he states, when a man sees the beauty in bodies, he must not run after them. We know that they are images, traces, shadows, and hurry away to that which they image. For if a man runs to the image and wants to seize it as if it was a reality, then this man who clings to beautiful bodies and does not let them go sinks down into the dark depths where the intellect has no delight and stays blind in Hades, consorting with shadows here and there. That's from the Aeneads. No, for Hypatia, this man was, quote, to delight in the intellect, unquote, an ultimate beauty, and not in her temporary and fleeting beauty of her flesh, her image, which would lead him astray. Of course, in the movie Hypatia, this man is shown to be Orestes, but we know in the primary sources, it keeps this person anonymous. We don't know who this is. Next image. Damascus mentions that there is another version of the story whereby Hypatia convinces him against pursuing a relationship with her through using musical expression. But Damascus very quickly says this version is ignorant. Hypatia was never known for her subtlety, but for her strength and directness. So it's like, no, she didn't do that. It's like, dissuade him through the harmonics of music and the balance of things within. No, she didn't do things lightly. She's just like, boom, direct. Are you glad? This is good. You're kind of getting or understanding her personality. Historical personality is coming through here. Socrates Scholasticus, who wrote between 380 to 430, yes, he is a direct contemporary of Hypatia, wrote as follows concerning her. So this is somebody who lived directly at the time. There was a woman at Alexandria named Hypatia, daughter of the philosopher Theon, who made such attainments in literature and science as to far surpass all the philosophers of her own time. By the way, this is a Christian author, Socrates Scholasticus. For him to say, which made such attainments in literature and science as far surpass all the philosophers of her own time, that's a big deal. That's a big concession. Having succeeded to the school of Plato and Plotinus, I'm still quoting, by the way, Socrates Scholasticus, she explained the principles of philosophy to her auditors, many of whom came from a distance to receive her instructions. On account of the self-possession and ease of manner that she had acquired in consequence of the cultivation of her mind, she not infrequently appeared in public in the presence of the magistrates. Now, these will be will be Christian magistrates by this time. Most of them will be Christian magistrates, and she's just appearing with them. Right? Neither did she feel abashed in going to an assembly of men, for all men, on account of her extraordinary dignity and virtue, admired her all the more. I'm going to read her more. I'm going to read this again. On account of the self-possession and ease of manner that she had acquired in consequence of the cultivation of her mind, she not infrequently appeared in public in the presence of the magistrates. Can you imagine? This is a woman during a period of time where women did not occupy these places, especially now with the encroaching Christianity and the perspectives therein. And she is just forthright. She's direct. She goes right in there and she's publicly seen. She's not ashamed. She knows who she is and she's bold for it. And I love this. She didn't feel abashed in going to the assembly of men, specifically Socrates Scholasticus, once again, who's living at exactly the same time, is noting that she is an amazing person, right? So you're going to start asking the question, wait, what went wrong? Because this is not what we're taught in so many different forums, even today. Congratulations. That's why you're here today, to learn this lesson. All men, on account of her extraordinary dignity and virtue, admired her all the more for the fact that she went into these places. And we take a look at the Greek, and it's not sarcastic. It's actually more. It's even more accentuated. Wow, right? As documented through the letters of one of her followers, Sneasius, we know it was a fact that people from all over the Eastern Mediterranean arrived in Alexandria just to become one of her disciples, sometimes staying with her for 2 to 3 years, while others remained with her 14 to 15 years or more. We have verified that some of these students specifically came from the Thebaid, in Egypt, from Cyrene in North Africa, from the eastern capital of Constantinople, and from Syria. What were Hypatia's teachings? What were they? Next image. Following her esteemed legacy, Hypatia was a proud Neoplatonist, following the teachings of Plotinus, like the revered father of Neoplatonism. Hypatia taught that it was possible to enter into a mystical union with the divine, often asserting that this union was possible through the study of mathematics and logic in connection with nature. Hypatia believed that astronomy is itself a divine form of knowledge, as noted by Sneasius in his Ad Pacomium. Later, in reflection of the importance of understanding astronomy as a gateway to mystical knowledge, Sneasius writes as follows. He says, I consider it a science that opens up the way to ineffable knowledge and theology. Unquote. Astronomy was the perfect mystical pursuit for Hypatia, for it incorporated two of the disciplines she loved so well, and of course she was very proficient at as well, mathematics in general and geometry in particular. Sneasius, sharing this passion with Hypatia in regards to the application of math with astronomy, declares of his discipline, quote, and it proceeds to its demonstration clearly and directly, making use of arithmetic and geometry as helpers, disciplines which one can properly call a fixed measure of truth, unquote. Okay, now we're at the moment that we have been waiting for. It's time for her reading list. Do we have a reading list? Yes, she has left us a reading list behind. We know her courses. Let's get her selected reading list. Her reading list, which became Sneasius's reading list, her prize pupil, includes as follows. All the writings of Plato. You got to read them all. Sorry. And that's a lot. All the writings of Aristotle, which, by the way, if you hadn't noticed, previously female philosophers did not like Aristotle. Did you guys know that? Right? We talked about that. Well, again, inclusivity. She had, along with many other Neoplatonists at that time, although the Middle Platonists are the ones who kind of bring it all together. So, yeah, you got to read the writings of Aristotle, all of them. Euclid and the commentaries on him. So you got to read all of Euclid. By the way, a little bit of trivia when it comes to Abraham Lincoln. What? Where? Left field. My father actually was one of the most foremost scholars of Abraham Lincoln. You look up Ronald Rietveld, you'll find it. He lists Abraham Lincoln's three favorite books that Lincoln himself said, and the first was of course obviously the Bible. The second was the writings of William Shakespeare, and the third was Euclid's Geometry. That's right. Lincoln loved math. Anyway, but you got to read that. You also have to read Plotinus's Aeneas. Yeah, so Plotinus's main work. You have to read Peripheries, which is a student of Plotinus, who's another Neoplatonist. You have to read his Life of Plotinus. Yeah. Materials related to pre-Socratic philosophers, especially Pythagoras. You have to read the writings of Pythagoras, including the Life of Pythagoras, which, by the way, was written by Pythagoras' wife, or attributed to his wife. By the way, you're supposed to read the Life of Pythagoras, both the version. Also, you have to read the one version of Life that's based upon this, on the one written by his wife, the version written by Periphery. And you also have to read the version written by Iamblichus of interesting. You also have to read Eunapius's Life of the Philosophers, which, by the way, I have right over here, and the writings of Hermas Trismegistus. And finally, you have to read the Chaldean Oracles. There it is. You got the reading list. So get started. So it's no mystery now. Well, there's mysteries, but we're not there yet. Next image. So you can see, I love this. This is a great image. I love this. Next image. Now, the founder of Neoplaton, this is not only Hypatia's belief. This comes from Plotinus, but they have one and the same when it comes to these beliefs, as we know. The founder of Neoplatonism, Plotinus, taught the idea of the ultimate monad, the one, never divisible in itself, which was equal to Plato's good and beauty, and was prior to all existence. That that first emanates from this one was called the nous, which was the divine mind, or logos. This is Plato's demiurge, so the word, right? That in turn emanated the world's soul, which is the lower part of the soul, and that was understood to be nature. The human soul then arrives out from this nature. Finally, the lowest aspect of all, matter in the material world, resides, the very bottom of the rung of the emanations. Through the effort of intellectual contemplation, Plotinus taught one could achieve mystical and ecstatic union with the one, which is known as henosis. How one was able to achieve this union with God was through a special kind of knowledge received via the personal experience of the power, dunamis, of the monad, as well as its nature. Once this is established, a foundation, arche, is formed, and even a location, topos, for all existence. The power of the monad then transcends what the mind can grasp, and the physical form can reach through its own exercises, although both areas need to be disciplined, surrendered in a sense in preparation for the reception of this power. This intellectual contemplation, the intellect and the mind not being the same thing, is activated through surrendering, this is important, surrendering the mental and physical barriers and opening oneself up to revelation. Sometimes they will use the word apatheia, having nothing to do with apathy. The idea is serenity, right? Serenity of contemplation. It says opening up, futta, as we know, even when it comes to Sufism, this idea of the opening, we open up to receive this power, right? We open up. Is activated through the surrendering of the mental and physical barriers and opening oneself to revelation, allowing the higher intellectual aspect of the soul, now separating from the material lower soul, that clouds of divine potential, to experience through theoria the unfathomable mysteries of the monad, okay? The true source of all inspiration and insight. The experience is likened to an ecstatic dance that is the ultimate bliss. Now, even though it is bliss, even though I've articulated this as Plotinus, we find, yes, Hypatia did teach this, and we find the seeds of every single thing I just mentioned in the writings of her favorite disciple, Synesius. We find reference to all of this. So this is her teachings. I'm giving them away. Here it is. Enjoy. So, next image. Because she was both a Neoplatonist philosopher and a mystic, she often delved into the deepest occult mysteries that were often shunned by the growing Christian age. Next image. In fact, later on, her mystical knowledge became demonized by certain Christians. This is way later on, specifically John of Nicaea, who, writing three centuries later, it's a lot of centuries, in this later, the 7th century, declares, quote, that she was devoted at all times to magic, astrolabes, and instruments of music, and she beguiled many people through her satanic wiles. Well, she did do magic. She was involved with astrolabes, and she did connect with music, so that's true, but the satanic attachment, well, remember, this is 3 centuries later. What I think is interesting, and I'll bring this up, is that so often they will use this quote and they'll act like it's contemporaneous. And they'll say, see, this is what people thought at this time about Hypatia. No, this is 3 centuries later. This is revisionist. 3 centuries, 300 years is a long time. But once again, we have to watch out for popular culture. Because as I just demonstrated from Socrates Scholasticus, who's contemporaneous, pagans and Christians, he's a Christian, say everybody loves her. Everybody loves her. You know, she's the exception to the rule. She's allowed to get away with it. Even though these persecutions are going on for other Christians, somehow she's able to survive unscathed for a while. Okay. So a part of this, of course, part of the charge that is being made here is because her habitual teachings was indeed a hybrid of Egyptian Greek mysteries. Many aspects of these teachings related to ancient demonological systems, and of course, to the fact she also taught both from Hermetic writings and the Chaldean oracles, which leads us to here. Hypatia taught a combination of Hermetic texts as well as other secret lore that is found in evidence throughout her father's works and in Synesius' work on providence. I gave you the sources. So I gave the father and, of course, her disciple. The Hermetica are, of course, are Egyptian Greek magical wisdom texts written in both Greek and Latin, where Hermes Trismegistus, a combination of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, both deities dedicated to writing and magic, discuss the nature of the universe with various disciplines, including Asclepius, Ammon, and Thoth. Much of the materials are ascribed to the school of Ammonius Saccas, which thrived in the 2nd century CE. Concerning the next image, oh, that's cool. Concerning the Chaldean oracles, Synesius later on reveals his intimate knowledge of them. Remember, that's her student in various hymns and in his work on dreams. The Chaldean oracle is often connected to the two Julians, one Julian the Thurgist and the other his father, Julian the Chaldean, who lived in the 2nd century. Most scholars attribute them to the intellectual and metaphysical melting pot of Alexandria, which of course may have valid influence from Chaldea here and there, the name associated with the ancient Babylon. In many ways, next image, in many ways mirroring Platonic cosmology, the Chaldean oracles describe an all-high, transcendent deity called Father, within which resides what is power, full of creative energy. Accordingly, an emanation known as intellect radiates from this power, contemplating the forms of the all-high Father, while creating and then managing the realm of the material world below it, acting as the demiurge of Plato's cosmology, standing between the realm of the intellectual fire of the Father and the fire of the material realm, next image, is Hecate. Yes, Hecate, sometimes called Magna Mater, acting as a mediator between the divine and the material world. Next image. That's a magical work, by the way. Hence, the Chaldean divine triad consists of Father, Hecate, and intellect. Hecate, as the mother, is the one who then emanates the world soul, which in turn emanates nature, which manages the realm below the moon. Nature rules the lower material aspect of the human soul and so connects to fate. But the soul can be freed from fate and nature through contemplation of the Father via one's higher intellect and living a life that rejects the flesh, hence purifying oneself. And this idea, of course, goes hand in glove to what I just talked about when it comes to the theoria, when it comes to the oneness, to the openness, the serenity of passion, right? And then to the receiving this image, and then going through this mystical ascent and bliss. So that we saw in Plotinus and other works. Pretty interesting stuff. So, hey, we're putting it together. Next image. Okay, so here we go. Okay. As far as the works of Hypatia, she wrote many works. For example, she wrote a commentary on the 13-volume Arithmetica of Diophantus of Alexandria. Now, I talked about Diophantus earlier. Diophantus is important. He is the father of algebra. But I thought that came from the Muslims. You're taught wrong. Sorry. No, this is where it came about. So algebra. But he was considered a little too difficult for most people. Even Theon's like, no way am I going to try to go through this work. It's terrible. That's probably why it's not used as much. But she wrote a commentary, 13 volumes, on the 13 volumes by Diophantus of Alexandria. And of course, as mentioned, he's one of the most difficult of antiquity, mathematician. Here it is. There's a big moment here. Many scholars have determined that the notes filling this version of Diophantus, his Arithmetica, that survives today, are directly from the commentary of Hypatia. In other words, it's like Cliff Notes. In other words, this work was so difficult. The Hypatia went through and wove within it her running commentary so everybody else can figure out what the heck he's saying to clarify this idea, which of course will become algebra. Well, what happened is that this then they just assumed then from there that this is all him, and it wasn't. And then this particular work will then go into the Islamic world, and then will enter, of course, our world. And so therefore, algebra and how we understand it is a legacy that we're getting right from Hypatia. Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. How come we're not talking about that? Here, all the math people are going, wow. Okay. Oh, but what's aftermath? Oh, sorry. Stopping the jokes. Okay, so you get the idea right there. So that form of the work does survive. Like Theon, her father, next image, Hypatia was interested in Ptolemy's Alchemist, and while he had written an extensive commentary, she focused upon creating a better edited version of his work. I love that. It's like, Dad, you tried. I can do this one better. In evidence of the fact that Theon was still living at the time when she made this revision, and of course of his consistent, I love this, of his consistent pride in her. The title of one part of this revised commentary on his Alchemist reads as follows: Commentary by Theon of Alexandria on Book 3 of Ptolemy's Alchemist, edition revised by my daughter Hypatia, the philosopher. Unquote. Wow. Wow. I read this and I just go, once again, I'll read it one more time. This is what he wrote. Commentary by Theon of Alexandria on Book 3 of Ptolemy's Alchemist, edition revised by my daughter, Hypatia, the philosopher. He gave her that title. You are, and that's a big deal. Dad says, you are a true philosopher, and I want everybody to know it. That's a proud father. This Ptolemy's Alchemist edition, of course, it survives. And so we have another work that is partly by Hypatia's composition. How are we doing? I told you we're going to get into the meat of it. Let's keep on going. But there is even more. For most scholars also agree that the version of Ptolemy's Alchemist itself, as well as his handy tables, were edited and prepared by Hypatia. Ptolemy was, of course, the famous mathematician, next image, geographer, astronomer, and astrologer from Alexandria, living from 90 to 168 CE. His Alchemist presented astronomical models in well-organized tables that easily facilitated one to predict the position of planets in the future as where they were located in the past. His star charts include 48 constellations, those that were visible from the northern hemisphere, of course. Obviously, Ptolemy taught the idea of a geocentric universe with the Earth as the center and the sun and planets going around it. Next image. Now, Aristarchus of Samos, who lived between 310 to 230 BCE, excuse me, was the first to propose that the Earth went around the sun, and so encouraged the idea of a heliocentric universe. But his ideas were largely ignored, and most in antiquity believed the sun went around the Earth, an idea also central with Aristotle. One thing I want to bring up, though, is that, of course, you had this idea of in the movie Hypatia. She seems to be very focused in on this idea that maybe she could have come up with the idea that the Earth went around the sun. And while I'm not going to say yes or no to this, because I'll give you hints here and there, I will say this. She may have followed after this belief of Ptolemy, and she may not have towards the end of her life. So she was flirting with various ideas about circles and conics and so forth. And so at the same time, what was becoming a big deal amongst many Platonists is that remember the allegory of the cave. Remember that the monad is represented by what? Yes, that's right, the sun. And so you're going to have heliocentric tendencies within many Platonic circles. And since she also ascribed to Platonism, it is possible, but we don't have evidence for it that she could have gone this direction. Next image. In his honor, Hypatia also edited her father's commentary on Euclid's Elements. Hypatia wrote her own commentary on Apollonius's Perga's Conics. Next image. Revealing her interest in circles and in curves. She does a lot of studying in this. We do see this also in the movie Hypatia. So she was very much into studying the circles, specifically the circles of the orbits as they go around. And this was a difficulty for her. So we don't know. Maybe the resolution would be this. Who knows? But it's interesting. By the way, Apollonius of Pergae. I've been to Pergae, pretty cool city. Lots of big ruins, big stadium there. Was in fact both an astronomer and an expert in geometry, and focused his research upon planetary orbits. Again, whether this focus made her believe that of a heliocentric universe, I suppose a geocentric universe, we are still not sure, but there are clues that led people to maybe assume that this is possible. So, okay, at one point, Damascus compares Hypatia to Isidore, saying that in comparing her to him was like comparing a mathematician against a true philosopher. With that said, Damascus reveals that Hypatia was still very well known for mathematical abilities as late as the 6th century. So as late as the 500s, she died again 415. She was well known, renowned for mathematical abilities. Once again, not quite the story that we've been told in popular culture. Okay. Now, Hypatia was also approved upon various inventions. For example, she took her father's astrolabe and created a more accurate version of it, which means that the astrolabe that was later used by Byzantine, medieval, and Muslim astronomers and astrologers and navigators was most likely the version that Hypatia modified from her father's original one. Yeah, right? With him receiving the credit, which of course I am certain she would be only too happy to concede. She just made it better, but he would frequently say, I know, she's good. Next image, she also took the recently invented hydrometer, which determines the relative density of liquids, and made a better one, with her student Sneasius asking her to make one for him at one point in his 15th epistle. He states, I am in such evil fortune that I need a hydrometer or hydroscope, unquote. From this context, it appears that Sneasius is wishing to use the hydrometer for more than strictly scientific reasons. Remember, Sneasius, even though he is a student of Hypatia, he is a Christian and a bishop at that. What? It appears that he's using this hydrometer for religious ones to ascribe to fate. Here we have a peek into Hypatia's possible manners of divination that is taught at her school. So here's another fun clue that you may enjoy having. And who were those? Let's take a look at me. Who were those whom Socrates Scholasticus states came from a distance to receive her instructions. One of her main students was Cnesius of Cyrene, already mentioned, who maintained a constant correspondence with her and the other pupils under her direct instruction. Even after his time of instruction under her tutelage, Cnesius and Hypatia continued their correspondence. We have his letters to her. Born, let's take a look at him. Born around 373 CE at the small town of Belgrade in Libya. Cnesius, there he is, went to Alexandria as a youth and met Hypatia around the years 392 to 393, which I think is really interesting because the prohibition against paganism came in 391, 392, and here comes Cnesius, right, to Alexandria, and she's still teaching away. He became a disciple of Hypatia and studied Neoplatonism as well as alchemy under her guidance. Who says so? He says so. At one point, Cnesius declared, just read him, today, Egypt has received and cherishes the fruitful wisdom of Hypatia, unquote. That's his epistle 136. Cnesius believed that God brought them together, according to his epistle 137. He considered himself as now amongst the, quote, company of the blessed, the most holy and revered of the gods, unquote, epistle 143. I think it's interesting that he's a professed Christian, I thought, and yet he says that I am in the company of the most blessed, the most holy, revered of the gods, plural. Interesting. Hypatia asserted that they were now a family, told her we're now part of the family, to view one another as one in the spirit and in mind. She pointed that beyond her, they were to revere the divine laws that, as Cnesius notes, quote, the man that we who are united through intellect, the best thing within us, and so should honor one another. That's right. That we are united through our passion for knowledge, our intellect. This is the best within us. And that through this, we should honor one another. Of course, that means also toleration. This is kind of fun because they had study groups. Wait, you know that they had study groups? Yeah. Do you want me to tell you more about it? Sure. Their study groups at Alexandria under Hypatia were organized into groups of 4 students each, representing the Pythagorean tetrachs, a practice Cnesius continued to follow later on in life by having reunions with his other 3 friends and former students of Hypatia in honor on various occasions. These 3 friends were bonded with Cnesius at the time of their classes with Hypatia, and they are, we know their names, Herculaneus, Olympius, and Hesychius. So you're studying, you're taking all these classes, these not informal, but these courses with Hypatia. You have the reading materials. Now you realize they have like little study groups. They're in 4s. And many of these study groups of 4s, they became very close friends. It's basically your study buddies, but you got, 3 others of them. And this is how they did this. And I think it's fun that we know the other names. As made clear by Cnesius, Hypatia revealed the inner mysteries to him and his fellow students. Mystical revelations only imparted following the swearing of a pledge that they kept, that they observed at her school. This pledge, which he says, they observed, quote, with their own eyes, unquote, and heard, quote, with their own ears, was to be kept secret, for Cnesius adds, quote, to explain philosophy to the mob is only to awaken amongst men a great contempt of things divine, unquote. Wow. Okay, so we're getting a little bit deeper here. Next image. Okay, we'll take that one down, but we're going to go right back to that one soon. So, what happens here is in 395, Sneasius left for Alexandria to study there until 399, but he was not impressed by what he found in comparison to Alexandria. In 399, he was selected to become the official envoy to the imperial court in Constantinople by the cities of Cyrene, along with Panopolis of Libya. I guess we can take a look at Panopolis. Let's go to the next image. Why not? He remained at the city of Panopolis for 3 years. During this time, Sneasius closely allied himself with the powerful Praetorian prefect Aurelianus at the court of the Emperor Arcadius, and managed to reduce taxes for those in Cyrene and at the Pentapolis, this series of 5 cities. Next image. There is some evidence in his work on praise of baldness that Sneasius was initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries, with many scholars determining that this may have occurred during his 3 years in Constantinople. Once again, wait, but he's a Christian. He's a Christian bishop. Wait, what's going on here? He's being initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. This reference runs as follows. You mean you're going to read it to us? Yeah, I'm going to read you this reference. It's a little long, but we have some pictures to look at. But I want to give you evidence as opposed to just saying it's thought to be or perceived to be. And of course, this language also would have come from Hypatia as well. He says as follows: the first of existing things are simple, but as nature ascends in the scale, she becomes varied. And matter is last in order of existing things, and therefore the most varied. Matter itself, when it receives anything divine, does not at once receive it to the full extent, but only certain appearances and germs of it. With these, it becomes intertwined, and the greater part of it is centered in them. Perhaps, therefore, it keeps these by overpowering the divine element through the inevitable encounter at their first meeting, before the appearance has been perfected. Each of these 2 states would be possible, nor are the words at war altogether they might seem to be. But since our discussion is not concerning these things, and since they have been introduced only because of other considerations, let us proceed to show in regards to the facts that nature grows stronger in the immature and yields to those that are strengthened. Are not the principles of the seeds that are cast into the earth something divine, even if this is only the last stage of the divine? The fruit is the consummation of these. But behold, the pride of nature. Behold its beauties before the stage has been arrived at. These are the roots, stem, barks, awns, husks, and other husks covering these last. But the fruit itself is still unformed and hidden. Now, when once this has appeared, all the playthings of matter are dried up and disappeared. For the perfected work now needs no adornment, and that already is perfected, in which there are another promise of seed. Now you're going, huh? Follow. We're getting a lot here. If you're familiar with the mysteries of Eleusis, I'm giving away some of the mysteries a little bit. He is doing it here. He is giving away aspects of it. But of course, there's more, and we'll get to the next sentence. It is in memory of this that Eleusis celebrates the revelations of Demeter. I'm still quoting. If then Mind is the most divine of the seeds that have come from above, and if it is settled in the head, and if the material mind is the fruit of this principle, as is the wheat of that, then nature is pursuing her accustomed course. She works her wonders around the head and adorns it with the beauties of hair, as if with thorns and husks, or by Zeus, even as if it with blossom, the like of that wherewith she graces plants before the fruit appears. But there is no fruit on the plant before the blossom fades. And so mind will not take its place in the head before, brought to perfection, it has cast aside in due course superfluous elements, as if by the winnowing fan of time, and has discarded all the folly of nature, so that we might regard all this as a sign that the head already been shown forth as the perfect fruit. If then you see one conspicuously denuded, be sure that mind has pitched its tent there, and regard that head as the temple of God. Mysteries would therefore rightly be psalmized concerning the head, to be called, perhaps for the sake of the profane, unveiling mysteries. But the wise would understand that they were festivals for the advent of the mind, and that man who has just arrived amongst the bald is in one newly initiated into the mystery of the God's appearance amongst men. Again, just as wheat, pomegranates, and nuts become bad and rot in their shells and in their pods, so heads may be evil, having no shame in the divine element, and for the most part enveloped in dead matter. I have myself observed that those who serve the divinity of Egypt do not endure even the hair of the eyelids. He's talking about those Egyptians who shave their heads. They were, it is true, laughable to behold, but they had certain wisdom in their minds as exceptional men and Egyptians. For it is not befitting to approach with dead portions natures which are eternal and whose being is incorporated in life. If therefore the man shaved by his own hand is pious, the bald by nature is by that very nature most closely united to God, for perchance the divinity itself is of such a nature. May it be propitious to my discourse, for it will indeed be uttered in that pious spirit, and of course, explanation point in English. But now this section, which I read, while I'm not going to go through every part of it piece by piece, kernel by kernel, I want to say that this should be something that ancient scholars should study. This again is coming from a Christian. Does this sound like a Christian document to you? Are you seeing the amalgamation that's coming here with the teachings of Hypatia and the openness of her students to bring in these elements within their discourse, even if they come from a theological Christian perspective, they still are, there's a sense of inclusivity here. You cannot deny it, but you can also see, it's pretty obvious, he's been initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. Next image, he's been initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. He just kind of gives it away. And then he goes into intellectual aspects of how to understand it, that is more than just a ritual, right? This is this here is an allegory. It's a demonstration of deeper mysteries, and he's kind of giving these mysteries away. Next image. But I find this as absolutely fascinating, and I just can't yeah. Again, we could do a whole talk just on that passage alone, but I read it because I want to make sure that you know that it exists. And me just saying, oh, by the way, I think Synesius was initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries. You probably go, yeah, maybe it's assumed or whatever it is. Now that you read this, if you're an expert in Eleusinian mysteries, you'd be like, oh my goodness, they're still going on now? in the 390s and the 400s. I thought paganism was ended. What's going on here? So you're seeing all is not what you thought it was. Okay, next image. Oh, these are such great images. Next image. These are all from the Eleusinian Mysteries and connected to it, and of course the torch bearing and the Demeter and so forth. Next image, and Persephone. So what happened is that oh, by the way, this is a really sad picture. He went to Athens, and when he went to Athens, he realized that the school of Plato was falling apart. It was not doing very well. He was not impressed. This is what the remnants of Plato's Academy looks like today. Yeah, so not much. So he left Constantinople in 402. The departure actually occurring during an earthquake. Sneasius returned to Cyrene in North Africa by way of Alexandria, visiting Hypatia along the way, because he always would. Before reaching Alexandria, Sneasius also visited the Academy of Athens again. Of course, he didn't like it. He said, he described the city in general as, quote, like a victim burnt in a sacrificial fire. There remains nothing but the skin to help us reconstruct a creature that was once alive, unquote. So not a glowing review on Athens, in the year 402. Then after a little time at home in Cyrene, Sneasius returned to Alexandria in 403. He married there and again spent time with Hypatia. Sneasius moved back to Cyrene in 405. So he's with Hypatia for 2 more years, between 403 to 405, where in 405 he continued to be viewed as a very important political figure, especially in his ability to organize the Panopolis in its fight against various Berber attacks upon them. Next image. In fact, Sneasius eventually became so important to those in Roman Libya that in 410, he was made the bishop Ptolemaeus. This is Ptolemaeus, consecrated in this post by Theophilus of Alexandria. Yeah. Who received a special dispensation to keep his wife by his side as he held this position. So here is a married bishop. He's allowed to be married. And he's a bishop. So there you have it. Next image. There's a few kind of cool places that have remained of this city. I love that wall that's just kind of standing there with the fresco on it. Next image. There's a church there. As Bishop of Ptolemaeus, here, Sneasius taught that everyone had the personal freedom to disagree with many of the primary Christian teachings. Again, reflecting the teachings of Hypatia. He taught toleration at all costs. If someone did not follow the church doctrine for how the soul was created, he begged grace from those who would condemn them. If the person believed in a spiritual rather than a literal bodily resurrection, Sneasius said these people must be tolerated. Even questions pertaining to the end of the world, whether going through literal apocalypse or a spiritual transition, was set aside and open to debate. While holding this ecclesiastical post, Sneasius never abandoned his Neoplatonic outlook of life, always seeing theoria or theosos with the divine as the ultimate goal, which of course is directly Plotinus, right? And Iamblichus, right? And periphery. And of course, these ideas will also be shared by the three Cappadocians, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nyssa, and Basil the Great. But there it is. He believed the same thing. So theoria with the divine as the ultimate goal, stating at the time he was bishop in one letter. So I'm going to read what he says about it. Contemplation is the end and aim of the priesthood, unquote. Because Sneasius was so politically powerful, he could teach mostly as he pleased, with his friendship with Hypatia of Alexandria, public and unapologetic. It is perhaps his strong stance on toleration that protected her. For only 1 year, this is important, only 1 year after his death, in 414, she herself died a victim of the very intolerance he so earnestly preached against. So I want to make this very clear. Long as Canisius was this powerful bishop of Cyrene, Hypatia was protected under the next bishop of Alexandria. Okay. So, but things will change. Next image. The Canisius of Cyrene also had a relative. Let's take this down for a second. This is really interesting. I'm going to bring this up. I promised this, and I do want to bring this up right now. So Canisius of Cyrene also had a relative who was another female philosopher focused on Neoplatonism and who lived in Alexandria by the name of Hypatia. I brought her up before. She thrived from the 4th into the 5th century, like Hypatia. Hypatia was known to be quite beautiful and was betrothed to a famous Neoplatonist philosopher by the name of Proclus at a very young age. But Proclus broke off the engagement following what he understood to be a divine warning, and so she ended up marrying another Neoplatonist by the name of Hermias, who worked under the Cyrenius of Athens with Odysseus by his side. Eventually, Hypatia returned to Alexandria, where Hermias lectured at the school of Horpolo and was paid to teach by the state. When Odysseus spent much of her time supporting her children, Ammonius and Heliodorus, in their educational endeavors, then she went on. When her husband Hermias died, Hypatia followed her son Heliodorus to Athens again and studied philosophy. All the philosophers in Athens, especially Proclus, praised her for her abilities and her virtues. Odysseus lived to be a very advanced age, with her funeral oration presented by young Damascius, who lived from 458 to 538, often called the last of Neoplatonists. So there happens to be another, and she outlived her. Another, see right here, yeah. Another disciple, now we'll go to the next image. Another disciple of Hypatia was Herculaneus, a close friend of Canisius. Next image, also recipient of many of his extant letters. Canisius and Herculaneus met Hypatia at around the same time, so presumably around 392 to 3, with Canisius sharing how exciting it was to be in her presence, revealing her already greatly anticipated fame. While Canisius left for Athens, his classmate Herculaneus, who was a person of some wealth, stayed on in Alexandria and close by Hypatia. Herculaneus was also a man of major influence, recommending Canisius to an audience with the count in Panopolis, possibly Pannonius or Simpletius. Either way, the student of Hypatia was another politically connected individual. At one point, Canisius asked Herculaneus to intervene on behalf of a certain victim of injustice. And so you have this. Anyway, so that's interesting. Oh, wait, one more thing I want to say. I do want to continue reading this because there's some more here. At one point, Canisius asked Herculaneus to intervene on behalf of a certain victim of injustice, a certain Phobanium by name, who lived near Cyrene, knowing that he could help him with his patronage, declaring, quote, "Thanks to the sacred and honored person of Herculaneus, he can triumph over his enemies," unquote. In one letter, Canisius brings up to Herculaneus a certain oath of friendship, quote, "under the sign of Hypatia," unquote, that may simply be a reference to a moral imperative agreed upon by students of Hypatia, but it could be something more. We cannot know for certain. At times, Herculaneus was not careful with some of the mysteries he learned from Hypatia that were supposed to remain secret, and tells him directly, "For my part, I am, and I advise you also to be more careful in guard over the mysteries of philosophy," unquote, the Epistle 143. Synesius visited Herculaneus many times in Alexandria, and we have extant letters inviting Herculaneus to Cyrene as well. Synesius reveals another student of Hypatia, his name being Olympias, another man of great wealth, originally from Syria. Olympias arrived in Alexandria to study under Hypatia at the same time as Synesius and Herculaneus between 392 to 393. Notice again that this is occurring. The 391, 392 is when paganism is no longer permitted, and everybody's kind of going to Alexandria, right? But stayed on like Herculaneus for some time as her student, returning to his home at Seleucia in Syria, Perea, as late as 402-03. Those are the picture earlier. And to his extensive properties there. Synesius writes 8 extant letters to Olympias, most on their love of the good life, hunting, love for horses and dogs, the beauty of their extensive states, and of course, you have philosophy. Now, Olympias appears to be a very strong Christian in the way Synesius addresses him, even praising him over his ability to deal with the Arian Eumenians. We also get the idea he had always been very zealous in his faith. Most scholars agree that Olympias was most likely a Christian at the time that he was a student of Hypatia, revealing more about the mix around her circle. Synesius' own brother, Eutopius, was one of the students of Hypatia, to whom we have 40 extant letters from his older brother. At one point, Synesius tells his brother to greet, quote, the most holy and revered philosopher, unquote, and to those who revel, quote, in her oracle utterances, unquote. Oracle utterances. So there we go. There's some more right there. It is in connection to his brother that we learn one more student of Hypatia, a certain Hesychius, who became friends with Synesius while taking Hypatia's course on divine geometry. Synesius tells Hesychius to be kind to his little brother. Now we get to this next image. Tells Hesychius to be kind to his little brother when he comes to Alexandria, reminding him that Hypatia's community was to be like a family, full of love and care for one another. Then, in support of this ideal of community that's centered about Hypatia, Synesius tells Hesychius to be harmonious and follows that their mistress, that's Hypatia, taught them about Euclid's geometrical assertion that 2 items equal to the same thing are also equal to one another. Other known students of Hypatia are just names, Gaius and Theodorus and so forth, but we know a lot. Without a doubt, the students of Hypatia not only greatly revered their teacher using the most affectionate terms, but viewed themselves always as part of her community, her family, whether they were physically together or not, making a pledge under her name to be true to one another. Also, most of these students of Hypatia arrived from wealthy backgrounds and went on to become either moderately or greatly successful, a few even entering into imperial circles. There is little evidence that anyone within the secular government disapproved of her, but much evidence that she was deeply valued by them, to the point where when Orestes, the new praefect of Egypt, arrived in Alexandria, that Orestes could consider her as very special. In fact, when Orestes arrived in Alexandria, he's a Christian, he immediately sought her advice and support. As for the religious backgrounds of her students, they appear evenly mixed. They really do. Backgrounds. Revealing her teachings did not stir up any religious animosity at all. In fact, her Christian students, Synesius included, praised Hypatia. As for Theophilus of Alexandria, we'll just look at me for a little bit. That's of course Orestes. As for Theophilus of Alexandria, the patriarch, while he was known for his intolerance towards paganism and Christians who did not believe the same way that he did, even his cruelty during his entire tenure as bishop of the city from 384 to 412, he never appeared to bother Hypatia, permitting her to teach as she pleased, and even gain more fame and students under his watch. Of course, we're about to go south pretty soon, so we're getting toward the end here. Okay. For example, Sneasius and his circle of friends all became her students in the middle of his bishopric in the 390s. So unlike elsewhere and with so many other peoples and groups, Theophilus of Alexandria actually appears, well, tolerant of Hypatia. If he was not, she would never have retained her position. The letters of Sneasius to Hypatia, 7 of which survive, are filled with literary quotations, especially from Homer and Aristophanes, revealing she also had a taste for both epics and playwrights. At one point, he attempted to send Hypatia his book entitled The Book on Hunting, but this book was lost, quote, by certain young men who cared for Hellenism and grace. So some people who loved his writing basically stole his book from him. As for Sneasius' letters to Hypatia, he addresses her as, quote, a blessed lady in his epistle 10. But more than that, Sneasius time and again refers to her as literally sacred. Epistle 133, for example, right down to her hands that received his letters. She appears to have this aura, this emanated energy of knowledge that was palatable to him in a very real and direct way. To Sneasius, Hypatia had attained to a literal, he says, sainthood, unquote. And he says a divine spirit fell upon the master Plato, and then later upon Plotinus, the father of Neoplatonism, and from whom she became their holy font, but also a great philosopher in her own right. For, in fact, at one point, Sneasius proclaims that she was, quote, a genuine guide in the mysteries of philosophy, is her epistle 137, which may be understood as meaning authentic from the understanding of the word, but for the Greek, Gnesia really represents the idea of having a divine genius upon them, a spirit that stands out as sacred, intended to be revered, and that is pronounced by all because of the authority and holiness exhibited through them. She was not simply any Neoplatonic philosopher, but one of the Neoplatonic masters akin to Plato or Plotinus, according to Sneasius and others. This is the big deal because we don't do that today. Today, we just kind of pass on. So something went wrong with the legacy when she's upheld with Plato, Plotinus, and now all of a sudden she's just the last of a legacy? What's going on here? Because Sneasius and those who knew her were blessed with her inspired presence, they counted themselves as rewarded by fortune, writing his brother Eutropius at one point that he was a member of, quote, the fortunate chorus that delights in her oracle utterances, her sacred words spoken in her divinely sweet voice, Epistle 5. In this voice, she revealed, quote, the most ineffable of ineffable things, unquote. This is in Epistle 137. This is really a big deal. According to Sneasius, Hypatia was all about following the words of Plotinus, said from his deathbed, that true philosophers were to raise up the divine within you to the firstborn divine. As Sneasius later reminded his friend Herculianus, that which is called the luminous child of reason, and what he calls the intellectual eye, Epistle 139, which is, quote, the eye that is buried within us, unquote. Sneasius wished this moment of divine theoria, this this moment of divination would last forever. He says of this bliss, he said, I should wish it to be the property of our nature to be always lifted up in contemplation. But to attain to this divination, this theoria, meant the constant sharpening in intellectual pursuits. He says, quote, life lived according to reason is the end of men. Let us pursue that life. Let us ask for divine wisdom from God. Sneasius was loyal to Hypatia, that her memory would never wavered from his thoughts. And many times while he was bishop, he expressed a desire to abandon his post and be with her in Alexandria. In fact, he declared that he would always remember Hypatia, even in Hades. This is a bishop saying this. Sneasius makes it very clear that Hypatia integrated her teachings on philosophy with the appreciation of Greek literature, as well as the importance of rhetoric, which was not often the trend of the day. Sneasius writes Hypatia, she says to her, some of those who wear the white or dark mantle have maintained that I am faithless to philosophy, apparently because I profess grace and harmony of style, and because I ventured to say something concerning Homer and concerning the figures of rhetoricians. In the eyes of such persons, one must hate literature in order to be a philosopher and must occupy himself with divine matters only. No doubt these men alone have become spectators of the knowable. This privilege is unlawful for me, he says, for I spend some of my leisure in purifying my tongue and sweetening my wit. You say, you guys just killing it. He's going to incorporate, of course, these ideas. Another remark in his letter to Hypatia provides a very direct idea of the kind of public teachers that Hypatia opposes. So he talks to her about this. He says, there are certain men amongst my critics whose effrontery is only surpassed by their ignorance, and these are the readiest of all to spin out discussions concerning God. Sounds familiar? Whenever you meet them, you have to listen to their babble about inconclusive syllogisms. They pour a torrent of phrases over those who stand in no need of them, in which I suppose they find their own profit. The public teachers that one sees in our cities come from this class. It is a very horn of Amalthea, which they think themselves entitled to use. You will, I think, recognize this easygoing tribe, which miscalls nobility for purpose. They wish me to become their pupil. They say that in a short time they will make me all daring in questions of divinity, and that I shall be able to declaim day and night without stopping, unquote. We know from elsewhere that these were Christian philosophers who were trying so hard to enroll Sneasius into their ranks, and so we understand that Hypatia, too, often encountered and had difficulties with such philosophers. At one point, Sneasius wishes to pass before Hypatia's judgment a book he hoped to publish on the mysteries. Yeah, he wrote a book on the mysteries, and he's sending it to Hypatia. He describes this book he's sending her. He says, he who is not undisciplined to discover even a certain divine countenance hidden under a coarser model, like that Aphrodite, those graces and such charming divinities as the Athenian artists concealed within the sculpted figure of Silenus or a satyr, that man at all events will apprehend all that my book has unveiled of the mystic dogmas. But the meaning of those will easily escape others because of their semblance to redundancy and their appearance as being thrown into the narrative too much by chance, and it might seem roughly. So he's basically saying this book is maybe a little bit rough. Uh, Epileptics are the only people who feel the cold influences of the moon. On the other hand, only those who receive the flashes of the emanations of the intellect, for whom, in the full health of the mind's eye, God kindles a light akin to his own, that light which is the cause of knowledge to the intellectual, and to the knowable things that cause of their being known. In the same way, ordinary light connects sight with color, but remove this light and its power to discern is ineffective, unquote. Immediately following this description, he states, quote, concerning all this, I shall await your decision. If you agree that I ought to publish my book, I will dedicate it to orators and philosophers together. The first it will please, and to the others it will be useful, provided, of course, that it is not rejected by you, who are really able to pass judgment. If it does seem to you worthy of Greek ears, if, like Aristotle, you prize truth more than friendship, a close and profound darkness will overshadow it, and mankind will never hear it mentioned. He's like, so she is the critic. He respects her, and if she doesn't like the book on the mysteries because he admits it's a little rough, then he's not going to publish it. This is definitely evidence of his incredible sense of respect of Hypatia's judgment, where he gives her the full power to consider whether his mysteries are worthy of revelation to the world or not. In the course of describing his book, Sneesius is obviously parroting back in a more coherent fashion the general Neoplatonic perspective of Hypatia herself, possessed as exhibited by other passages about her in other letters. While Hypatia is a very personal mentor, she was also a divine guide, and the scene here did not let friendship, personal feelings get in the way of communicating what she believed was the truth. You wanted to talk on Hypatia, you wanted to talk to exactly know who she is, you are getting it. There's more than you thought there was, right? There's a whole bunch. But we're a little bit further, but not that much, because we're at the fall now. I feel like you understand now Hypatia. So what happened? What happened? So here we go. We're at the closing here. For the fall of Hypatia from grace in Alexandria, leading to her death, this was connected to a long and tragic story of Alexandrian religious politics of the era, becoming a pawn in an ugly power play between Orestes, the governor of Egypt, and Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria. Next image. It was quite literally a war between secular and church authority. There is Cyril of Alexandria, with Hypatia caught in the middle. The bishop Theophilus died in 412, having never overtly opposed Hypatia, and was replaced by Cyril of Alexandria as Patriarch of Alexandria, who was set upon doing persecutions right from the beginning. Cyril of Alexandria would dominate the bishopric from 412 all the way to 444 CE. Immediately upon taking his seat upon the bishop's throne, Cyril began persecuting any Christians he deemed as heretics, especially the Novatianists, closing all their churches and confiscating all their belongings. And so Cyril followed the very same cruel precedent as Theophilus before him, unfortunately. According to Damascus, right? So primary, right? In the life of Isidore, it's a little bit later, but still, Cyril, the bishop of the opposing party, went by Hypatia's house and noticed a great throng at her door, a jumble of steeds and men. Some came, some went, others remained standing. Let's look at me for a little bit. He asked what this gathering meant and why such a tumult was being made. He then heard from his retainers that the philosopher Hypatia was being greeted and that this was at her house. There's all these people. This information so pierced his heart that he launched I'm still quoting, by the way. This is a quote. He launched a murderous attack in the most detestable manner, unquote. Obviously, this attack did not arrive right away, but it appears that directly from the start, Cyril was set upon opposing and getting rid of her influence. Scholars are divided when Orestes became governor of Africa, using the official designation as prefect, with anything from 412 to 3 years after Cyril came to rule in 415. Either way, Cyril viewed Orestes as a possible rival in power and set upon trying to assert himself against him. For he learned Orestes was both tolerant of the surviving pagans of the city and the Jewish population. And Cyril had little patience for either group. While Orestes was a Christian, we know that he was only recently baptized in Constantinople before his appointment as governor of Egypt. So he may have still retained or perceived to have retained some of his pagan upbringing. Socrates Scholasticus makes it very clear, now this is a contemporary, right? Makes it very clear that Orestes consulted with Hypatia on a regular basis, and these meetings were not simply regarding her field of philosophy, but she was asked questions related to the running of the local government and on politics, meaning that from Cyril's point of view, she may have been considered a political threat to him and his position. Note that we do not have any documentation about Orestes coming to him for advice, which was to be expected, but didn't he go to his vote? For his predecessor, Theophilus, was always involved directly with the affairs of the Alexandrian politics. So now Orestes, the Roman governor at Alexandria, and Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, became embroiled in a war of egos and beliefs in 415 over how to handle Jewish celebrations in the city. Next image. Especially the dancing shows, which became an alluring attraction for both Jews and Greeks alike. We can see right here. You can see right there. You can see there's a theater there by the Jewish quarter right there. So that would have been where this is. You see also an amphitheater there and a hippodrome, right? So Orestes wrote up a decree, next image, that established that's probably not the actual theater, but that's still a nice representation there. That's an Odeon, next image. Yes, okay, so we'll be getting into the Jewish aspects here. Okay. This is an earlier image. It's 250 BCE, but some of these places continued on all the way into the late 4th century. So Orestes wrote up. So you got these celebrations, especially the dancing shows, which became a alluring attraction for both Jews and Greeks alike. Sorry, I need some water here. I'm talking too fast. Okay, good. A little warm where I'm at. Sorry. Okay, where am I at? Okay. So Orestes wrote up a decree that established certain rules of conduct to be followed by all and had it posted on the theater wall. When the decree was read, the general public disapproved of the measure, all except one of the followers of his rival, Bishop Cyril, a certain Hyrax by name, who declared it as absolutely perfect. Next image. So you get the idea of it's more of the Alexandrian synagogue that's there. Next image. And so by saying so caused the riot. So when he saw the decree, it's absolutely perfect. Yeah, there's a riot. Orestes believed that Hyrax was a plant made by Cyril to intentionally mock him and cause this disturbance. Socrates Scholasticus notes that Orestes was one of many who held a certain, quote, jealousy of the growing power of the bishops, which encroached on the jurisdiction of authorities. In response, Orestes had Hyrax arrested, taken to the theater, and before all, had him tortured. Cyril reacted by assuring Orestes that if he did not stop persecuting Christians, he would persecute the Jewish community with the utmost severities, unquote. The Jews of Alexandria now felt threatened, devised a scheme to attack the Christians first before they attacked them, running down the streets of the city in the middle of the night, saying that the great church of Alexandria was on fire. When the Christians came out of their homes to see if this was true, quote, the Jews immediately fell upon them and slew them, unquote. Cyril then searched the synagogues for those involved in this plot, gathered all the Jews of the city together, and then banished them, letting the Christians take all their belongings. Socrates Scholasticus states, Orestes was filled with great indignation at these transactions and was excessively grieved that a city of such magnitude should have been suddenly bereft of so large a portion of the population. Now, next image. Yes, okay. So Cyril attempted to make peace with Orestes, declaring him to be a fellow Christian and showing how the Gospels made them all on the same side. But 500 monks of the mountain of Nitria, who were it's quote, of a very fierce disposition, came down to Alexandria to fight on Cyril's side, attacked Orestes' chariot, and declared him to be really a pagan idolater and not a Christian at all. One of the monks by the name of Ammonius threw a rock. You see the word Ammonius to the left there on this inscription right there. Ammonius threw a rock at Orestes' head, injuring him badly as blood ran over the soil. As Orestes was being assaulted, his personal guard fell away. But the people of Alexandria came to his rescue, fighting back the Nitrian monks. And then Ammonius was brought to justice, duly tortured of his offense, and died shortly afterwards as a result. But Cyril declared him, this man right here, as a martyr, which he was certainly not. Scholasticus mentioned how the Alexandrians understood that he suffered the punishment due to his rashness. This is a quote, not because he would not deny Christ. I'll say it again. This is a quote from Scholasticus. He mentions how the Alexandrians understood that he suffered the punishment, this being Ammonius, the punishment due to his rashness, not because he would not deny Christ. Losing this is actually referring to Orestes. Sorry about that. Truth realm. Losing his credibility in the eyes of Alexandrians for his ridiculous claim that Ammonius was a martyr, he set his focus upon attempting to prove that Orestes, next image, was really a pagan after all, by using the old ploy of guilty by association. That's good to know. So now, as we discussed, most Alexandrians considered Hypatia as quite virtuous, and Orestes often sought her counsel in many affairs concerning the city in his less than 1 year of office, or 3 years, depending on the version. Now, Cyril decided that Hypatia made the perfect target, since she was not a Christian. If she was not a Christian, how could a Christian like Orestes take her advice from her? Perhaps Orestes was also really not a Christian either, or maybe she was poisoning his mind with her pagan philosophy. So Cyril convinced many Christians using this faulty logic, and they kidnapped Hypatia, led by Peter the Reader, who was specifically called a fanatic by Socrates Scholasticus. I want to make this very clear. Socrates Scholasticus is a pagan writer. Is a Christian writer. He's a Christian writer. And from his perspective, this man who did this persecution, this assault against Hypatia, is a fanatic in a bad sense. The Greek is used in the terrible sense. So he is the bad guy, according to this Christian writer. Next, they took Hypatia, quote, to the church called Caesareum. They then completely stripped her and then murdered her with tiles. She was then mutilated and burned. And so Hypatia, according to Scholasticus, fell, quote, victim to the political jealousy that at the time prevailed, unquote. Next image. But he adds, surely nothing can be, Scholasticus writes, this is important for you to hear. I'm going to read this very slowly. I want you to hear this. This is important. Okay. So what he says as follows. Scholasticus says as follows. He says, surely, quote, surely nothing can be farther from the spirit of Christianity than the allowance of massacres, fights, and transactions of that sort, unquote. That's something that we should hear today, too, by the way. In fact, rather than celebrations, Cyril was condemned for such brutal actions. The spin will come when the supporters of Cyril would later on do everything in their power to demonize her, for they were fighting against a majority who did indeed see Hypatia as an outstanding woman. Let's look at me for the rest here. Another version of Hypatia's demise survives from Damascus's Life of Isidore, as preserved in the Suda. Now, the famous Neoplatonic philosopher Damascus lived in 458 to around 538. So he lived about 30, 40 years after Hypatia. And so his version of story of Hypatia is definitely a little bit later than Socrates Scholasticus, who lived from 380 to 439. So you're going to see a progression here. Okay, so and so roughly a contemporary of Hypatia, Socrates Scholasticus. Now, here in this version of the story, version number 2, the orchestrator for her death was none other than Cyril of Alexandria himself. Jealous over her popularity with the Alexandrians and bent upon curtailing her power, the account runs as follows. He says, for when Hypatia was going out as usual, several bestial men, fearing neither divine vengeance nor human punishment, suddenly rushed upon her and killed her, thus laying her country under the highest of infamy and under the guilt of innocent blood. And indeed, the emperor was grievously offended at the matter, and the murderers had certainly been punished, but that Odysseus did corrupt the emperor's friend, so that his mastery, it is true, remitted the punishments, but drew vengeance upon himself and posterity, his nephew paying dearly for this action. Okay, now let's clarify this. Now, the emperor in reference here is Theodosius II, who ruled from the death of Arcadius in 408 to the year 450 CE. But at the time of Hypatia's death in 415, he was still considered too young to rule and was first placed under the regency of the Praetorian prefect by the name of Anthemius from 408 to 415, and then under the influence of his older sister Pulcheria, who was declared as Augusta, who acted as the official regent for 415 to 416. This is where it gets interesting. Apparently, the young Theodosius, only 14 at the time, initially wanted to condemn this action, as did his sister Pulcheria. And one can only imagine the horrified reaction of the new Praetorian prefect, who took Anthemius's place, a certain Aurelian by name, who was a close friend of Hypatia's friend Cnesius. So, Hypatia and Cnesius have friends in very high places. So the question is, who is Odysseus? Now, According to the primary sources at that time, Adasius was the imperial officer sent to Alexandria to investigate the matter of Hypatia's murder. And here is where the sources get muddled. All we can tell is that his investigations were long and drawn out, and somehow those directly involved in the murder somehow escaped litigation. Does that sound familiar? But with that said, Odysseus did determine that those known as the Parabolani, or the lay brethren, these Christians, were too powerful and posed a danger to the people of Alexandria, deciding that they were from then on forbidden to appear at public assemblies and the games, with their numbers reduced. Furthermore, they were placed under the administration of the prefect of Egypt, yes, Orestes himself. But this is where it changes. Orestes, however, unfortunately, was so dispirited by the death of Hypatia and the power politics of the patriarch Cyril that he soon resigned his post and left Alexandria. Cyril then immediately seized upon this shift of power and managed to regain his position as head over the lay brethren within the year and increased their number from 500 back to 600. Okay, you're seeing this, right? So there was an investigation. Orestes, I wish he would have stayed longer and maybe justice would have been served. But anyway, so where is the spin? Last page. Yeah. Where is the spin? The Hypatia was this wicked figure. The negative image of Hypatia does not occur until the writings of John of Niku in the 7th century. And it is here, 200 years later, that she is accused of working in magic and beguiling Alexandrians through her satanic wiles. Unlike Zachary Scholasticus, who actually lived at the time of Hypatia, or the well-respected and balanced Damascus, writing a little later, 50 years later, John of Niku came from the 7th century, the 7th century world, where intellectual pursuits, especially pagan philosophy, was readily condemned. John of Niku was all about the rhetoric, the creation of a story as a guide to force people to believe as he did. John claimed that Hypatia encouraged the Egyptian prefect Orestes to abandon going to church and to become her student. And furthermore, that he then influenced others to leave the church and join them all in a philosophical discussions at his home. While such house discussions were certainly possible, as a public official living in Christian Alexandria, he would not have been so reckless. But then again, this was written 2 centuries later, and the story received a life of its own in the retelling. In this version, after Orestes published an edict, quote, regarding public exhibitions in the city of Alexandria, quote unquote, Cyril of Alexandria sent Hierax, quote, a Christian possessing understanding and intelligence, to discover the cause of the public outcry. And so he became, I'm still reading the quote, and so he becomes merely the messenger of the riot. When Hierax read the edict and approved this account says that the Jews believed he was being sarcastic, told Orestes, who had him tortured for a crime, that he is wholly guiltless. The entire episode of the 500 Nitrian monks beating up Orestes and the Alexandrians defending him is, of course, conveniently skipped, for that would detract from the agenda. While Cyril condemned the Jewish community for blaming Hierax, Orestes in this account is shown as encouraging them to defy the bishop, which of course is not mentioned in Scholasticus' account. The Jews then plot to run through the streets of Alexandria at night, crying out, "The church of the Apostolic Athanasius Alexander is on fire. Come to succor all you Christians," unquote. Many Christians were then killed in the ambush that followed. Here, the two accounts seem to agree. They also agree that Cyril kicked the Jews out of Alexandria and ordered all their belongings to become booty for the remaining Christians. John of Nicaea adds that the synagogues of the city were purified and converted into churches, which is certainly possible. Now, at this point, John of Nicaea brings in Hypatia, saying that Peter the magistrate, as opposed to Peter the reader, led the multitude of believers in God against Hypatia. Yeah, perhaps he got a promotion, right? Next, this crowd proceeded to seek, I'm quoting, proceeded to seek for the pagan woman who had beguiled the people of the city and the prefect through her enchantments, unquote, as opposed to walking home, as in the Scholasticus version. She is found sitting in a chair, and then of course, they kidnapped her. The account continues telling how, quote, they dragged her along till they brought her to the great church named Caesareum. Now, this was in the day of the fast, and they tore off her clothes and dragged her through the streets of the city till she died. And they carried her to the place known as Cinerin, and they burned her body with fire. In celebration, Cyril was declared as a new Theophilus, and at last pagan idolatry was expelled from the city. So I had actually spilled some water on my glasses, so I'm going to wipe my glasses. Yes, last paragraph. So let's wrap this up. I think we've learned a lot. More about Hypatia than you expected, right? All right. The story of Hypatia represents to so many the twilight of the ancient world as it moves into the Christian age, an age unfortunately characterized by the very same intolerance inflicted upon them just a couple centuries earlier. Those in power, regardless of religion, use whatever beliefs were widely accepted at the time against those who did not follow the status quo. And that's true for today, too. Just as the intellectual Christian philosopher Justin Martyr found himself disposed of by pagan emperors because of the religious politics at the time, so Hypatia found herself disposed of by the Christian authorities of Alexandria because of the religious politics as installed by the Christian emperors at that time. In the middle of these political ploys using religion were many people who tried to interact on a human level rather than buying into the stereotypes. Hypatia, a pagan, was a close friend of Orestes, a Christian. But because he was in a position of power, that connection was used against him in order for the Bishop of Alexandria to gain power. Later on, the legacy of this power play was understood only in religious terms by writers like John of Nicaea, who no longer could see this interaction in relation to politics, but now simply viewed it as a battle of Christian versus pagan, good against evil. Sadly, true intellects, regardless of religious beliefs, stood to suffer. For the simple-minded rarely listen to reason from any source unless it stands to benefit them or support their already deeply entrenched beliefs. Hypatia of Alexandria was probably around 64 years old at the time of her death, and so by ancient reckoning already understood as elderly. But her death represented that opposing viewpoints from people from intellectual backgrounds who were outside of the standard beliefs were no longer to be tolerated. But for a while, A pagan intellectual woman of Alexandria was greatly respected in an already very Christianized Alexandria, and the fact that she lasted as long as she did amongst the powerful of the city indicates that the transition between a pagan empire to a Christian one was not as sudden as often taught. As for her significance, Michael Deacon summarized it best when he states, quote, almost alone, virtually the last academic, she stood for intellectual values, for rigorous mathematics, ascetic Neoplatonism, the crucial role of the mind, and the voice of temperance and moderation in civic life. Thank you very much for being here. That concludes my talk.